Good evening. It's always fascinating to hear the sound just sort of taper off instead of just die like that. Let's do that again. Okay, now build up slowly. Announcement. Next week, we have a newly scheduled lecture. One wasn't scheduled. And Holly has been trying to get an architect from Barcelona who we've been interested in getting here, named Enrique Moraes. The work, I think, now being done there's a lot of extraordinary work being done in Barcelona, which gets very little ink in this country. And it's, I think, some very important work. And Enrique Moraes works with his wife, who's also an architect, and they're considered to be among the best young architects practicing in Barcelona, in Spain, perhaps the world. He'll be here next Wednesday for the evening lecture, speaking on his most recent work. This evening, Margaret Helfand is an architect from New York. In reading the sheet on her, it was interesting because there's a mixture of stuff here that I wouldn't have it's not normal to have such a variety of stuff on one sheet. She was born in Los Angeles, did environmental design at Berkeley, worked for Marcel Breuer, did some time at the AA, worked for Peter Cook, and a variety of other things. The thing that was that seemed to be consistent was somewhere in some of the things that she's written and what's been said about her. Which seems to be, I think, what currently is going on with architects of this current generation that are practicing, is they're trying to develop a new sense of order. They're not looking at old systems to determine how they pursue their own ideas. And the one thing that seemed consistent to me with the track that she's been on through starting in LA, through places she's been educated and where she's worked, is that it's non-linear. I suppose that in her education and in her traveling and in her working, she's been sort of in a constant search. And it's really quite evident, I think, that she probably believes, as others of us do, that the shortest distance between 2 points isn't a straight line. And I'm expecting that her work will probably exemplify that. So here's Margaret Helfand.
Well, I think that introduction is going to ring true once Michael sees a few of these pictures, too. We have a little non-architecture, which may possibly mean as much or more than some of the architecture we're going to see tonight. Yes, it is indeed true that here you thought you were getting a New York architect and you just got somebody from LA. In fact, not only that, I have to admit that I was conceived in a trailer parked in an orange grove somewhere near Pasadena. And I think that has certain significance, as you will see as I fill you in on a few more details of my personal life, which involved a lot of moving about. So you should think about where your kids are conceived. I think this has great significance. There are a couple other moments I want to talk about briefly before we get on to what is the serious or presumed serious business of the evening, looking at architecture pictures. I want to talk about one of my major pastimes as a kid, and that was building card houses on the floor in the living room. Now, you may laugh, but I think this has great significance, as hopefully you will see a little bit later. Great structural possibilities with card houses. Another interesting thing is the fact that in high school I was a determined math science person doing arts and crafts sort of secretly on the side. It all seemed to point to a career in architecture, but of course my guidance counselor at Verdugo Hills High School, which may or may not mean anything to the crowd assembled, thought that that was really not an appropriate thing for a female to do. And this is less than 75 years ago, but I won't say quite how much. So I scratched my head and I thought, well, maybe that was right and I'd find something else to do. So I promptly went off and studied art history, thinking that a polite career in criticism and theory and curating would be just the thing for a nice young lady to do. Now, that was all well and good and I had lots of fun, but I was anxious to find out what all that meant in reality, so I did what everybody was doing then and dropped out of school for a year and found myself a job at the Museum of Modern Art and thought I'd get my feet wet. Well, what I learned, thank God then and not 10 years later, was that it's a very different thing being associated with artists from being one. And the politics of the art scene and the museum scene were certainly no better than the politics of being an architect, so I decided I'd go back and do what I really intended to do. And things were a little more clear for the next few years. So I left Swarthmore College, where I'd been an art history student, and trundled off to Berkeley, which had this very appealing program in environmental design in the late 60s. Only to discover that sort of Berkeley was on strike for a few years, and it made it a little difficult to get anywhere in the studio. But that didn't really stand in my way, because I got a job working for Bakken, Argoni and Ross, which was a very productive place at the time, a lot of new ideas. And I started learning something about architecture and decided this was really the thing to do. However, lo and behold, this being the late 60s, and everybody was pretty preoccupied with being a hippie and a political radical and everything else they could figure out to do, I bumped into some people who had this great idea, and it just seemed like the thing to do. So 20 of us chipped in $1,500 and went off and bought a 90-foot three-masted schooner in Denmark and decided that the thing to do was really to sail around the world on $1,500 apiece, which actually sufficed for the first couple of years. Now, this meant that we bought into a do-it-yourself project. So we took this boat to Spain, where we could live on it with no heat and no water, but lots of cheap wine, and proceeded to set about rebuilding, which in many cases was building this ship. Now, you have to understand that none of us knew the first thing about any of this, and there were only about one or two that had even set foot on a sailboat. But the times being what they were, we all figured we were infinitely competent. And we bought a couple books on ship model building, which taught us how to rig and do this and that. And lo and behold, it worked, and we floated the thing and sailed around the Mediterranean, discovered that we needed a hell of a lot more wind than we had in the Mediterranean to move this boat around. So we fitted her out with square sails and decided we would let the wind push us around the Earth. So that was the beginning of a great travel adventure, which had rather substantial ramifications, I think, for me personally, in developing ideas about just about everything, which goes from life to architecture. So let's start looking at some pictures here and see if this makes any sense. On your left, you have dawn over the West Crater on Isabella in the Galapagos. This was arriving at the Galapagos. This was 2 years into this 3-year journey. I was on dawn watch on this ship, which you see on the right-hand side at anchor at sunset in the Galapagos. Now, we're not just looking at travel pictures here. Hopefully, we're looking at images that really have a lot of meaning. we're looking at some things here that are pretty basic. And I think my personal concern with the basics in life and in the world really helped me make a lot of decisions when I design things. We're now looking at a couple more basic images here. On our left, we have a wonderful piece of nature. I mean, it's everything you need. It's some water and some earth and some foliage. This is a little island in the Galapagos, and on the right-hand side, we have one of the local citizens who's been around for probably close to a couple hundred years, and he really has a very wonderful sort of personal shelter system, which I found quite wonderful. It seemed to have served him well for quite a long time. So I felt really that he had something figured out. This is another aspect of life at its most basic. On the left, two of our happy crew members who have just landed after 30 days at sea in the Marquesas in Hiva-Oa. 30 days at sea without a fresh bite of food tends to get one really excited about pulling feathers off a chicken. That was a great dinner. Now on our right, we have an image which suggests preparation for a party. I'm sitting on a horse. We went up into the mountains to get a wild pig to have what is more commonly known as a luau. That's not the term used in the Marquesas, but that's the general idea. The pig has been butchered and is on two ends of a stick on the shoulder of the fellow there, following the guy with the rifle. And the third guy has the makings for the sauce, obviously a chili bush, which we whacked off in the wilds. It was a great party. Now we're getting down to business here. The islanders have a few other things figured out too, besides how to eat and what to look at and how to live with nature. That's a little hut in Tonga. Post and beam. Post being the trunk of a coconut tree, and the thatch on the roof being palm frond, and the siding being, as you see in the detail on the left, a sort of a cane material which is woven and reinforced at the base line by crossing over. In fact, at the very bottom you see there's a little fine line of this material crossing back over to give it rigidity. Nice little house. Here's some more houses in the French Marquesas, just a little farm compound. Interestingly, and I don't know the reason why, there's sort of one of each type. The left-hand one is obviously twig. The one in the middle is woven panels of palm frond. They take a palm leaf and just bend it over on the spine and then weave the leaves of the frond back against each other to make panels. Sort of modular construction, if you will. And the one on the right is a cane which is flattened out, as you can see, and woven. I don't really know how that could be improved upon even by an architect from Los Angeles or New York or anywhere else. Another detail of, on the left, a hut from the Marquesas, and on the right, we have a little house from Fiji. They seem to have a different approach. It's a little furrier. Now, I don't know whether they need the extra insulation. Some of these other houses on the islands are designed to let the air penetrate. The one on the right looks like that's unlikely to happen. But it certainly has a personality of its own. A couple other images which are nothing new but were somewhat interesting on my travels. Sort of a nice example of unit masonry. These guys didn't need a whole lot to do what they were doing. They sort of did it quite elegantly with pieces of stone. Can we have the lights up just for a second? Now, you may wonder what all this means. So I have prepared a few sort of didactic remarks here that will pass for theory, and then we can go on and look at some more pictures. Okay, the first one is, as it seems to me anyway, I mean, this is what I learned after 3 years of wandering around. And some of it's personal and some of it is a little more general. The first one is my favorite, and it is as follows. If you take big risks, you'll probably survive. It's easy to say, but hard to live. The second one is, if you don't take big risks, you may not have such an interesting life. The third, the rest of the world may know some things we don't, but we have to go and see the rest of the world to find out. You can see I'm a travel nut. I think there are a few things to be learned. Next, we must protect the natural beauty and ecology of our planet. And I think that's very hard to really feel in your blood and bones unless you travel to places where nature is all you can see for days. Spending 30 days at sea is sort of helpful in that regard, but there are other ways to do it. The next one, simple solutions for human needs can be the most elegant. Hopefully you will see some embodiment of that principle later. Life passes quickly, so why make things more complicated than they need to be? The corollary for artists and architects, of course, is that there's plenty of room for invention and expression from within the nature of the design problem. We don't need to invent excuses to do things. There are plenty of reasons right in front of us if we just look at what we're trying to do. So, the bottom line of all this is we are back to basics. Okay, more pictures. Now, this is just a little warm-up exercise here to give you a kind of a thimbleful of our office design philosophy. I'm going to show you how we designed our Christmas card this year. Now, you may think that's really silly, but things can happen with Christmas cards when you're an architect. First of all, we had a box of 500 mailing bags, which are about 3 by 5 inches with a little name tag that we happened to have, and we really were looking for some way to use them. We thought Christmas was just the occasion. We also have a lot of stationery, so we thought, well, let's do something on a piece of stationery that said something about what we were about and was fun and this and that. So this is a piece of our stationery. Starting back here on the left, though, well, let's go back here for a moment. So we folded it up. There's a hole in our stationery, which came in quite handy because when you folded the piece of paper up, it wouldn't stay flat enough to get in the bag, so we obviously needed to enclose it somehow. So lo and behold, one morning, one of our people stopped by Canal Street and got some of this copper wire that had been unraveled from something and sort of was interesting. It had a little sort of texture. So we needed to do something to close it, and we went to the hardware store and got some little lead shot that's used for sinkers on fishing line, little lead ball, teeny weeny thing. And if you take this wire and stick it through the hole and wrap it around the paper, and down at the corner, then you can put this little lead thing and crimp it with a pair of pliers, and the thing stays flat, and then you can stick it in the bag. So all it was left to do was to say something about Happy Holidays, and we thought we should sign names on the thing. So we took this piece of paper. The green is the back side. The front is white, of course, because you have to write letters on white paper. And we all signed our name in white, and then we rubbed it over with this bronze dust, so you got sort of a relief. And then we stamped it with a rubber stamp, obviously, that says Season's Greetings, folded it up and wrapped it in the wire, and crimped it with the lead shot and put it in the bag and sent it off. So that was sort of the etymology of the Christmas card. It's not a great deal unlike solving other problems, which we will now address. first project I'm going to show you is, fortunately, was just finished and photographed last week, so we have some pictures of the real thing. This was a study model, which I want to show you because it contains the key to the concept and the development of the plan. This is our office. Now, I need to also explain that it's in a 19th century townhouse on the parlor floor, and it has a lot of wonderful detail. So the container really wanted to stay intact, and everything we did to it really wanted to be freestanding objects, because here we are in 1989 and the building was built in 1863 and so forth. So we have two things happening at once. We have the existing shell, and then we have all the elements inside, which are functional elements, nothing extraneous. This is a model of the conference room door, but it's the plan that I have to show you because we never actually drew the whole plan to the project besides this. We have 3 layers of glass, which you see on the right. On the left, they're superimposed. The first layer is cut glass. It's done like antique cut crystal with a wheel carver, and it's polished up. These white lines are actually just the light picking up in grooves in the glass. And this is the key to the geometry of the whole plan, which I'll return to in a moment. The center panel is all of the sort of special objects in the office. Some of them are icons and others are pragmatic elements. For instance, if you can see here, we have a triangular toilet and a round sink, which are here on the icon sheet. We also have furniture and cutting surfaces for the drafting stations. The right is a figure ground diagram. Now the center, this little pointer is just not going to help at all. Imagine the center third of this panel being the plan. You can see it here in the conference room where we have a rectangular conference table, and the white and then the black surrounding that are really the plan. On the left you see the unfolded elevation of the left-hand wall, and on the right there's also unfolded elevations. That's a fireplace on its side, so that should help you see the plan. The entrance is sort of right in the middle in this narrow space. You will see that shortly. Now, the basic plan is generated from this diagonal, which bisects the conference table, because this room needed to serve both as a private office for me and a conference room, because it was a large space. It needed to do more than one thing. So we have a conference table here and a desk here. You will see all of these things shortly in real life. The left image is what you see when you walk in the front door, and the mysterious things floating around are actually shadows cast by the conference room door, which you're looking through in the right image. Let's see here. This shelf, this bent steel plate is this, and you're looking down toward the drafting studio. We'll come back and talk about this shelf unit, which is doing various things structurally. It's all sort of precariously teetering in space, which we'll talk about in a moment. And this line in the floor is the continuation of the diagonal line, which you saw in the geometry plan. We're now on the right-hand side. We're looking from the far end of the space where the bay window is. You can see that this room has wonderful original detail, mahogany wainscoting and mahogany beams in the ceiling and so forth. You can now see the conference table in 2 pieces. The conference table is pretty basic. The base is just a bent steel plate, an L-shaped element, which you will see here. Then above that is a sheet of corrugated cement, profile 6. And then 2 layers of OSB, I don't know what you call it here, oriented strand board, wafer board, whatever you call this stuff. Here it's stained black, so it's sort of relieved from its tedious sort of regular color. In the corner is the other table, which is the mobile element, and that's these 2 layers, the base, which is bent steel plate, triangular frame, and then 3 bent angle legs, under which are little casters, so it rolls around. Here you see the first iteration of the table base, which was 3/16 plate instead of quarter. We decided that this just wasn't going to make it. It wasn't quite rigid enough, so we admit our mistakes and we turned them into bulletin boards, upended, and we made a new base. The chairs we'll talk about a little bit later. There's a whole story about why the chairs are doing what they're doing. There are 6 different shapes in 3 pairs with the same frame. This is in the drafting studio looking back toward, you can see in the distance, the conference room door. All of the furniture is made of OSB, and this room stained white. We have a white room, a black room, and in the middle we have colors which are all natural materials, which we'll come back to. Now, these desks are all standing on these pylons, which are triangular because triangles are very minimal structure. All of this is freestanding, nothing's attached to the wall. And here we have a detail looking up under the shelf, the typical station shelf, where the Profile 6 is actually cut into slots in the pylons, so it's just all gravity structure, everything's just resting there. This just wouldn't do for earthquake code, but we're in New York anyway. And then the shelf rests on that, and the lights clamp to the shelf, which you see here. There's a little table for the library, which is slotted plates and 2 layers of top, and a shelf, which is our sample. We have 3 libraries. We have our book library, sample library, and research sort of product information library. This is our sample library, and these little shelves here are where we sort of put out lovely things we like to look at to use in another project so that we're inspired. Architectural photographers strip things down so it looks a little uninhabited, but it doesn't quite look like that in reality. Just a detail to show how things work. This detail intersection of materials is actually right here. We're looking at, this is a plan file. This is the desktop right here, supported by file cabinet. Pretty straightforward. What we've done is each station has a cutting surface because we do a lot of model building and we're sort of tired of ripping up our Borco. So we have recessed areas to receive 30 by 40 sheets of 1/8" chipboard, which can be thrown away and replaced and flipped over and so forth. So that's what you see here. Now, the 30 by 40 dimension is actually wider than the return, so we had to turn it. I mean, these things all have reasons. It had to be turned so that the corners would be engaged here and here and allow us to use a standard size sheet. This is our product literature library. This is the sample library. And this is this amazing steel door, which you will see. Okay, now we're looking at the steel door. Now, we could have just put a door on this closet. I mean, it's only a coat closet, but it just wouldn't have been any fun at all. And anyway, we wanted to think about what doors do and how they're built and all of that. So we said, what if this door were a hinge leaf with an 11-foot long hinge pin? And everything followed from that, obviously. So here's our hinge pin, 11 feet top to bottom. The door itself is just a plate of steel, 1/8" steel, which is bent on the edges to make it more rigid. Here it returns to sort of enclose the closet, and on the opposite edge it sticks out to create a pull. What you see at these 3 points are the actual fastening which hold this door to the hinge pin. These 3 points are where it's connected. There's a repeated element here, which is a flange fastened through to the door. The back side of this is threaded rod and acorn nuts. Threaded to a panel, which is a bent steel plate, which actually is welded to a tube so that the door can pivot. And then at this point, and this point, we have ball bearings. This you can move with a feather. It weighs 1/4 of a ton, and you can literally move it with a feather. This is the door in the open position. I realize this is just a door, but please, you have to put up with this because sometimes you just have to get into what things are made of. So here we are. This is the return. This picture is a little hard to see what's going on, but there are 3 sleeves, which you see here, welded to these bent plates and bolted through and so forth. We also have little bronze cylinders, are barely visible at the top, which are bushings, and they have to be bronze, but we didn't have any objection to that. But bronze is the material of choice for bushings. And this is just a detail showing the ball bearing, and it rests on a tube with a set screw. So it's really pretty simple. Inside is a shelf, which is just a bent steel plate with brackets for holding bars. The bathroom is a tiny space, but not ignored. The material here is, it's called Dynatech. It's an epoxy type of terrazzo tile in 20 by 30 sheets, so we just use that module to create a pattern, 3 colors. The full sheet is this size. And again, this is just a standard steel door with a ground finish. All the hardware on the job is bronze, so this is just our bronze hinge and handles. A detail of the shelf in the entranceway, just very simple. There are a lot of things happening here with bent steel plate. This is one of them, very simple. This shape bent here and here. We wanted to bend it a little tighter, but they couldn't do it at the shop without it collapsing, so we bent it to here. This is where sort of outgoing messenger things get tucked, and the top is sort of where icons go, and it varies, but is usually little material samples that are current on a project that we like to play with and look at. We also see the shelves here. I think we have a detail. Here we go. Now these shelves, first of all, each plank is a different hardwood, just so we can have nice materials around. This one here is Purple Heart. They're all different colors and different woods from different places. The shelf rests on a bent steel angle, just a folded 1/8" plate, which you see here, which is again slotted into the OSB. The shelves rest, and they rest somewhat precariously, but that's kind of what makes it fun. The corners are wedged as necessary to prevent up or down turn. In this case, we have to hold it down from this corner so it won't fall over. In other cases, other corners are pinned. You can see here that the supports go in different places, giving us different requirements for the corners. This corner is wedged in, obviously, to keep it from collapsing, and so on and so forth. These panels are allow slots between. There's 2 layers here, so there's a continuous slot in the back at each of these points. So we can just tuck corners in as required. So it's a very simple system. The tables work, again, very simply. As described before, there's a bent steel plate under this one, and this has a triangular frame. And the layers, actually this working drawing shows a lot of the same things that happen in the door, the layers of the table. And again, everything's all gravity. It's just sitting there. This is sitting on that, and that's sitting on that. The chairs. The chairs are also bent plate. And they work in 3 pairs. Here you see them all together. This pair is the simple form, and then this is the next more complicated, and this is the next. And we'll look at that here. Well, this is just working drawings on the table. Okay. We took a plate of steel, 31 by 36 inches, and cut it in half here, and then folded it here to create a seat and back. It's pretty simple. Here it is, tilted at the proper angle to give you total comfort. You could actually sleep in this chair, surprisingly enough. I've even had clients who spent 3 hours sitting in these chairs at meetings interviewing us and actually gave us the job, so I figured they were okay. I was a little concerned at the first meeting there. Okay, the frame is just a simple bar stock. This is a cube, obviously, have to have cubes. And these two legs come up and attach to the bottom side of the chair. The seat back unit is suspended actually from the top. It's welded at that point and dangles in space here, which gives it a little resilience and assists with the comfort level. The frames stay the same on all the chairs. The seat in this one is pretty straightforward. I mean, it's straight and straightforward simultaneously here. The next one says, okay, we'll take the same rectangular plate and we will cut it on a diagonal so that we get a little bit closer to the traditional chair shape, which is broader on the seat and narrower on the back. And of course, you get the mirror image on the other plate, so you have two chairs that are opposite hand. The chair then looks like this, with this diagonal reading. Oh, it's bent perpendicular to the straight side of the plate. Because it can be fastened anywhere along the back rail, the corner can sort of project and it's still supported, so we get this condition. The third pair takes the same plate, the same diagonal, but says, okay, what happens if you then bend it, fold it perpendicular to the diagonal side? You then get this shape, which you see here in this pair. Now, this all might seem kind of silly, but it really gives us great insight with clients because they will have very particular choices about which chair they want to sit in, and that's really very helpful for us in evaluating how to approach them. We have some people that have to sit in this one and others that have to sit in the first one with the straight sides. These are just some details. This is what the left is what you get if you take the Profile 6 very simple thing, cut it on the diagonal. You get sort of a wonderful thing. That will appear in another project that you'll see actually turned into a skylight. So all of this time spent designing furniture really has its use. So when you are all frustrated architects wondering when you'll get to do buildings, you just don't have to feel quite so frustrated because it all will turn up later as full-blown buildings. Okay, we are now going to talk about a project which is just in conceptual form. We submitted a proposal to Rhode Island School of Design for an extension to their art museum. They are building a contemporary art wing. This might be a project that people have heard about here. It's got to be one of the smallest projects going, but it seems to have engendered a tremendous response. They had 53 design proposals submitted. And we heard just yesterday, in fact, as I was dashing out to the airport, that we were one of the 8 to be shortlisted. So we're rather excited about that and hope that we may get a little closer to building this project. So let's look at some pictures. Providence is kind of an unusual place. The whole thing is an architectural history museum. It's got a lot of Victorian and colonial architecture and a lot of small-scale buildings. It's all residential scale around the RISD campus. So we had to work with that constraint. We also had to work with a couple other. The site was very peculiar. The site is an L-shaped open area right there. This is the existing art museum. I'm sorry, this pointer is sort of losing its enthusiasm for life here. This is a church, and this is another RISD building, which is this kind of half-timbered Tudor Victorian extravaganza, which makes it very difficult to be a neighbor, especially when you have to be, if not contiguous, you have to be adjacent. That sort of, this corner became the whole root of the problem, which we tried to solve. Now, their program required this much space at ground level and the same amount of space below level. It's a total of only 2,500 square feet. I mean, it's really tiny, but nevertheless, they want to produce a major piece of architecture, so it becomes a serious problem. And they wanted it to be right in this corner. So if you took all that space and put it right there, you would literally be engaging this building, which didn't seem like a great idea. Also, there's a wonderful little sort of footpath beaten through here that slices through on the diagonal, and it seemed to want to remain. So we tried very hard to preserve that and still create the building in this corner and the sculpture garden here, which they wanted, and additional sculpture garden space here. This is a tunnel. This meant we could not encroach on this area. There's a bus tunnel right under the buildings here. So we had to stay clear of that. Well, the only way we could figure out how to get the space on the site was to divide the building into two masses. We said that the first one would be the primary gallery with a high ceiling and would be suitable for displaying major contemporary art, large-scale pieces. The second mass would be a secondary gallery for smaller works and also contain the other ancillary functions that they needed, catering, some bathrooms, coat storage, and delivery access, which wanted to happen in the middle of the sculpture garden, which we scratched our heads over but tried to work with. Now, this was a solution, but it just didn't seem to be the ideal solution, so we kind of scratched our heads. We said, okay, we're basically looking at quadrants here. We have building in this corner, a building here, which isn't us, but we have to respect it, and we have these two open spaces. What are we going to do? So we said, okay, well, maybe we really want to talk quadrants and put some big walls that sliced right through the site and created an end wall for this building that really had no side elevation because it used to have a party wall to another building. So we then have these two strong elements, linear walls, and then we have two pieces of building which are differentiated volumes. We took the second one and turned it, allowing things to really kind of get freed up through here and also create an entry point on this corner, which you can't really see with this pointer, but anyway, that little corner by the tree there. They wanted an entrance available for special functions, although it would never be the primary entrance to the museum. It would be used for receptions and so forth. So that sort of made this a little more of a facade and an entry point. What you see here is how this works in reality. This becomes the entry point. This is the delivery drop-off and so forth. And this wedge through here contains the ancillary functions. The secondary gallery is a free-form space which is well suited to smaller pieces. The primary space is very formal and works for major scale pieces. And we connect here, which creates sort of an axial relationship in this building. This is where they want to connect to their existing galleries in this wing. This is the diagram illustrating the floor plan. This is the level you've seen, primary gallery, secondary gallery. The lower level is costume and textile archives here, study center, and classroom space. This is all workroom and offices here with clear-story windows because we have a truck dock above. So the grade is pushed down here, and we have the possibility of natural light, although we do not want natural light anywhere in here because the textiles and costumes are very fragile and do not like natural light. This is just an illustration of the roof, which becomes extremely important, although I didn't talk about it. The site is on a steep hill, and all of the roof shapes are really quite prominent in Providence, especially the museum. They're all sort of skylit tops to things. I mean, all these shapes are very visible from the environs. We used the idea of skylight to create an interesting form on the roof and also admit natural light. The primary gallery has a folded plate roof which allows light to come through on these lines. Glazing is vertical to minimize the problems with water penetration in museums, which I understand you people know an awful lot about lately, with Isozaki's problems. So this is all meant to be vertical glazing. The lower element has a lower profile roof, also a folded plate with the glazing on the perimeter, because again, we don't want a lot of natural light over the artwork in this space, but we want it for circulation. So we have this relationship where we have vertical glazing on all of these faces, and here we have it on the edge. All of the roof forms on the existing buildings are copper, so this is all copper and glass. This is the entrance point. These are the site walls, which are all rubble stone, which is what is in existence already in this court. There's a retaining wall on this side, which is old rubble stone. So it's really very, very, very basic. Stone walls. These containers are brick, just sheer brick. All of the glazing is in the roof. So it's copper and glass on top. And that's really the whole story. Whoops. We need a few more model pictures to show the relationships. The roof folds on the two segments relate to each other, as you can see. On the primary volume, they relate to the geometry of the existing museum, of the other building, and vice versa. This is an elevation as you might see it from up the hill. The primary entrance to the museum is right here. These are all little sort of colonial pavilions. There's a sculpture garden in the middle. That's a big skylight. And then we're tucked down here with a sculpture court. And then because we're already down a level before we get to our entrance, you're really looking down on these roofs. I mean, there's a lot of action here, seeing things from above. What you get when you slice the roof at this angle, like our table, you get these interesting things going on. The sheer brick wall is actually not a rectangle in elevation. It continues up and approaches the back slope here of the copper sloping roof. And you get a similar thing on the other elevation with the other building, and here you get the end elevation, which is really very dynamic from the side street. This is where our trucks pull up. This is our site wall slicing through, and this is the passageway, which is opened up for the footpath. And here's our Tudor Gothic Victorian extravaganza, abstracted with turret. I mean, you cannot imagine this thing. It's quite wonderful. So that's the RISD project. Next I want to show you a couple images from a project which is about to go into construction. And it's a very, very simple, small project, but it has a few interesting things that I thought I would show you. These drawings are on glass, so you're really not seeing double here. Those are shadows in both cases, the double image. Very simple. One-bedroom apartment, entrance point, a space that nobody ever knew what to do with, bathroom, kitchen, and then this sort of living thing space that was never really defined. We proposed putting dining near the window because people tend to live at tables more than they live at sofas, sort of seating area. We made this into a study on one side, and on the other side, I don't know what the polite term for this is, but it's got all of the sort of audio-visual home equipment and a giant monitor. This is a strange client who is somewhere between being a physician and a media personality. He's a medical correspondent for ABC, and he does a lot of video productions himself, which he wants to work on at home. So this became a very serious piece of the project. Now, all of this was supposed to happen in, about 700 square feet, so we really had our hands full. We decided to simply leave the apartment as it is. It's in a landmark deco building in New York. We're just messing about with the kitchen and bathroom, and everything else is freestanding objects, which he can take with him or whatever someday when he leaves. Now, it's a tight space and there's not a lot of natural light, so the first thing we wanted to do was take this solid core, which is really the only intrusion in the larger space, and turn it into a lantern. So we poked holes on each of the three sides in two places and said, okay, this is where we want translucent panels to allow light to pass through and enter the space, especially here where we're in darkness, and also in the bathroom. We added a hole so we could watch television from the bathtub. I guess this happens in other places, but it seems to happen a lot in New York. Okay, so we needed to come up with some way to do these translucent things, and decided that this was a great opportunity to do some experimentation in glass. So we devised an idea of collaging glass together, which we had done in a showroom, which you'll see in a few minutes. Layers of glass which are translucent and still do interesting things. So the obvious solution, I mean, you have to then design these doors. Well, we didn't want to just frivolously set about diddling and doodling. We said, let's just take something obvious like the floor plan. So what you have here are patterns for the three pair of doors based on these objects, these elements. And here you see the two panels of glass overlaid. So here are the patterns. The green is iridized hand-blown glass. The white is fluted glass, Flutex. It's like 1/8-inch fluted glass. And then what is blank here is an interesting product which is laminated glass with an interlayer with magical chemicals and particles that reflect one color and transmit the complement. So we have this glass that's sort of somewhat iridescent, and it reflects pink and transmits green. So depending on the direction the light hits these panels, the colors change. This is just a drawing showing this unit here. Well, here's the plan, turned about. This is a desk. The structure is pretty simple. There are two bent steel pylons in the corners from which are suspended cabinets spanning across, which you can see here and here and here and in section. It's all freestanding. The desk is a bent steel plate which simply rests with a leg on this end, which you see here, and the top just kind of sits on the top of the cabinet, and the television monitor sits up in there. Then there are a series of thin steel shelves, sort of cantilevered from the pylons, which hold all the components. The table is an interesting thing too, which you'll have to wait till someday when it's in print. I don't have any material on that, and this is another structure with bent steel plate and steel shelves and wood bookshelves. What floor? 7th floor. 7th floor apartment with no view, unfortunately, because it's on Riverside Drive. So we sort of wanted to make an interior landscape that would suffice. These are the patterns for the door, just to show you how this works from the working drawings. This and this are mates, and these are the pair that relate to the plan of the dining area. This is the composite, and this is the layers. There's one layer of the complementary color glass, and then these are the other ones in pieces which are laminated. We discovered this fellow in Pennsylvania who does this work. It does make it a lot easier to design these things if you know of people who can build them. And actually, he's the guy, after we designed all this, he came up to chat with us and brought a sample of this magic glass, which we have never seen used before, and I'm not sure he's used it. It's sort of something new he's been playing with. So it's nice to see that these craftspeople really are part of the process on a daily basis. So we revised our design notion of materials, incorporating that glass. This is a project which some of you may have seen published. It got a lot of press. around in New York as well as everywhere else. And I just want to sort of run through these images to give you some more examples of how we think and why things are the way they are. This floor plan shows you the corridor in the building. It's an apparel showroom, wholesale apparel showroom in New York, in a high-rise building, which once was an office building and now is all showrooms. So it doesn't have any overly exciting distinguishing characteristics, but it's a given space, and here it is, sort of rectangular space. This is the corner of the corridor. We took a bite out of it to sort of draw people in, and here you see the bite. This column actually defines the true corner of the corridor and receives the rolling fire doors, which are required to close off all this glass area. That's what these slots are doing. Here you see the little window that gives you a peek into the showroom proper. This is the showroom, this is the reception area. These two spaces are really a free plan. The rest of the offices are really based on a more Cartesian notion of orderliness and business-likeness. The conference room is sort of in the middle of things, and it has a little of both. These are the two partners' offices. Things calm down a bit in here, but they're pretty crazy in here. Here you're standing at the entrance door. There's a granite slab for a door jamb, and the glass door right here you see on edge, looking at reception. Here you're looking at it from the other end. Just really a little work in assembling materials in a very, very restrained, simple way. This is actually a drawer unit facing the receptionist station with a little inset of glass so that when you put the flowers on the top of the cabinet, you don't get rings in your cherry wood. The plan on the left is about all of the objects in the showroom that were designed with the idea that when there are no clothes on the display racks, the place would look interesting and suggest what was going on in the showroom. It's a sportswear manufacturer doing knits, mostly sweaters and some dresses. And they use only natural fiber. So we thought that the use of natural materials was a good way to express that. And the idea of the free plan, again, was consonant with the notion of casual sportswear. This drawing shows you the public areas, as we just saw, and all of these objects which are flying around inside it. The center of it all is the sample storage unit, which is this piece here, and it's a combination of steel, wood, and glass. The three two-sided display fixtures here, each of which has a table and chairs on each side, giving you 6 sales stations. Each of them is one material, and the form was really a little endeavor into what the natural forms for the materials are. This one is steel. It's just plates of steel that are slotted to create hanging space. This one is cherry wood, and it's volumetric, this guy in the distance. The third one here is glass. It's layers of glass, half-inch, 3 different kinds of half-inch glass. And it's the one near the windows to allow as much of the natural light to penetrate as possible. The glass is freestanding, really. It's kind of grabbed between 4 pylons, which are cantilevered from the floor, which you'll see in some details. And then the bars are attached to the pylons. So the glass panels are just sort of standing there in space. This is the back side of the window you saw from the entrance hall. The window, instead of being a normal window, is just a plate of glass pinned to the wall. Actually, it doesn't even rest on this shelf. It's sort of floating an inch above. Here are these brackets. It also slips behind this steel panel which screens the room. The steel panel is not fastened to the wall, but it does have another plate under it which this granite slab is resting on as it projects through the wall. This is the steel fixture that has slots on one side for hanging, and on the opposite side it has bars the same height which slip from one side through across this sort of flat triangle. so that this side you hang the hangers from the bar. Here you hang them in the slots. This is the end of the sample storage rack where we just have cantilevered steel plate supporting folded items. And here you see the table that we designed for the space, which has got to be the most basic possible table. It's 2 plates of steel slotted halfway and interlocked like an egg crate, sort of your basic structure. And then a slab of stone just perched on top. Another view of the entrance. Here you see that steel panel which does not go through to the wall. The glass, acid etched glass, this is bronze glass and clear glass, each of which is ½ an inch thick. So it's pretty meaty stuff. This is another little rack that we had to add when we were halfway through the design, so we created a very quiet little alcove and just this steel bar, sort of anthropomorphic creature that just has plates that sort of jam into the ceiling and walls to hold it all up. Details of the steel piece. This is the bottom where this glass panels are just resting. This is the foot of the pylon. Actually, this thing's bolted through to the slab. We welded and ground off the head, so when it's time to remove this from the showroom, they're really going to have an adventure. It's one way to make sure your client doesn't mess with your design. It'll probably cost them more to have this removed than it costs to build it. This is the upper corner of that unit. Again, you see the pieces of glass, and they're just sort of held by these pylons, which are plates of steel welded and ground. Disc grinder. This was the first time we used steel doors like this. They're just standard steel doors and bucks, and we had our steel person finish them with a grinder. There's another one in the distance here. It's a cheap trick. These doors are like $100 a piece, so just a secret. This is the base of the wood unit. It has a steel base, which again is quite delicate and sort of perched on the ground. And these wood shapes are just resting. A detail showing you the small table, and the table in the conference room is a bigger version of that. It's got one long plate here which is cut out because we didn't need all of that steel plate. It's cut out in a couple places, and then there are 2 cross pieces which are slotted underneath to stabilize it. And the top is a honed black granite. All of the stone is honed. The rails on the wall are just steel plate clipped to the wall. Now we have a few images of one more project, and then I promise I'll quit. This is a project which was included to illustrate another set of images which can result from the same approach to design. It's a retail shop in Atlanta for a very spiffy traditional designer who we have done a showroom for in the same building as the showroom you just saw. Now, this is a little different. This is a biaxially symmetrical scheme. So just for everyone who wants a breath of fresh air, this is also consonant with the current design philosophy in our office. In fact, it was kind of refreshing to work on it, I have to admit. It was all inspired by the space, which is a double square. It's 26 by 52 with 2 exposed sides, sort of a fishbowl, double square fishbowl. So we said, this is terrific. Let's just do it. So we have basically a double cruciform, which is best shown in the ceiling, which is a suspended trellis work in ebonized oak. If you divide it right down the middle, you see we have this in the center, and then we have these 3 sides creating our cruciform. The entrance, of course, is right smack in the middle. Here you go, floor plan. The show windows are just a continuation of the glass facade here. It's completely transparent, the facade. This is just etched glass. With dichroic, this is really wonderful what happens with dichroic fixtures. You get all these great colors. And you can see all the way through the shop. You can see every piece of product hanging on the racks and shelves. So we just have mannequins standing on the floor for the window displays in these locations. These two alcoves become the clothing display areas, and the dressing rooms in this fantasy world here in Atlanta are silk tents, here and here, which you see sort of backlit, mysteriously backlit. They're suspended from the ceiling. They're 2 layers of silk, a striped silk on the outside and this really wonderful ecru China silk that sort of reminds you when you're inside the tent of being in your underwear drawer, if you're female, I guess. The floor plan, again, is quite straightforward. Here's your entrance. This was what we had proposed to do with the maple strip floor, but this is what we could afford. These things do happen. The materials are very simple. It's all ebonized oak, suspended trellis work, which carries light track, and bird's eye maple. All of the hardware is bronze, and that's the whole palette. These are just details. You see the tent. You're looking through the window. You're actually outside the store, and you're looking all the way through to the back wall where there's a mirror and a little table for sitting. When you write up, you sign your American Express bill for $1,500. You sit here under the pyramid, which you will see shortly. And the armoire units, which contain the apparel, have panels to display the merchandise flat. So these are just little bronze pins that you can hang hangers on, and these are bronze poles inside the armoires. On your left, you see the trellis. This is the important point where you sit and sign your American Express bill. On the right, you see the little peephole window at the far end of the store, which is on the longitudinal axis, this window here for accessories. And at the very far end of the store, all the way down, 26 times 2 is 52. Okay, 52 feet away, you then get this little mirror. So if you stand in the right place, you can see yourself here, out here. So this is where all the accessories get displayed. Mirrors to look at yourself, lots of double mirrors so your kids can play games while you're trying on your clothes, shelving and so forth, and little tables we design. Looking into the tent from outside, we designed the fixtures in the tents, which are these little delicate linear black things. This is a mirror panel, which is 7 feet tall and 20 inches wide, which dangles in this sort of A-frame wrought iron structure with little teeny-weeny 1.5-inch ball caster feet in bronze. Here are some more details. Inside this dressing room, it is utterly opulent. I just can't even imagine undressing in there. I haven't done it. The light from the ceiling and the fixtures. The A-frames are the same. One holds the mirror, which you see here. Now this is tricky. There's a mirror here that is fastened to this bronze rod, which sits in the cross top of the A-frame. The reflection in the mirror is this piece, which is the same frame with just the bronze rod here, and you know that because there's a hanger here, which of course is satin. And this is the grand finale. We have these delicate little feet on the floor on the right, and on the left the detail of how these things perch in the frames. So there you have it. I would be happy to take questions if everybody's still awake. Wait, excuse me, you have to speak a little louder. Boy, that's an easy one. You take dark black stain and you rub it into oak. Yes. That's a big question. I don't know where to start with that one. I'll start with the first part of it. As far as design principles go, risk-taking. Here's a small example. We set out designing a set of shelves for the foyer of our office, examining what shelves were all about and how shelves sit on things and so forth. And we came up with a design which I can assure you is precarious. We didn't know if it would work. We designed it so we could sort of move these slabs of wood around and tuck them in where they needed to be tucked to prevent them from falling down, and so on and so forth, which was kind of exciting to not know exactly how it was going to work and if it would work. And it works. The table base we wanted to do in the thinnest possible steel plate, the first iteration, and it didn't work. And it's the one that's the bulletin board, and there's another one that works. We have to be prepared to screw up. We built the furniture in our office out of OSB, which is not a material commonly used for furniture, and it has a lot of problems. We didn't know how it would turn out working with tools with that material. It worked out better than we expected. There were other things that we did in something called Etterboard, which is a cement panel product, which didn't work out because you can't machine the edges of it and get a nice finish. Well, okay, so that didn't work, but it works enough and it's there, and it was an experiment. So I hope that that very specific couple examples will illustrate the point. Does that make any sense?
Well, I guess I asked about the two projects and I understood those. I mean, I guess if I was to take a guess at my own answer, or no guess I would think is that maybe you kind of have an attitude of to each his own. I mean, you try to suit the needs of the doctor with the audio-visual taste, even though it's both those projects are kind of consumeristic. I mean, so but you try to suit their tastes anyway.
Well, I had no problem working on either of those projects, and I think without clients' requirements, I wouldn't know how to design anything. You have to start with that.
Okay, I mean, I'm satisfied with that. I was just looking for an attitude towards the environment that you had initially, I guess, said was consistent.
Well, I think that comes on a very personal level, and it has to do with my decision to use natural materials and to use simple structural forms and keeping things really as minimal as they can be. I mean, I don't feel that there's a lot of gratuitous activity going on in what we're building. And just that level of restraint, I think, exhibits a certain respect for the universe. At least I hope it does.
Well, I was curious about what happens when client requirements shift in a different way, because I think your risk-taking works here. You obviously share something about the very little things, and because the projects are financially stable, you can afford to rein in all of those things. But what happens if you're dealing with a client who is an individual person, a large program, a large institution, where somehow the model has to undergo some kind of shift to accommodate that? Do you think it's expandable, or will this kind of thinking become relevant at large scale?
Well, I think that bringing to fruition any project is a long-term interactive process with the client, and there are any number of permutations and developments which happen along the way, and that's all part of the process too. I think the pragmatic constraints and the political constraints of institutional clients, and we've dealt with them too, are just all part of the process. I don't see it as a negative, it's just a reality. Yes?
Do you consider yourself a deconstructivist, and if so, what do you feel it means?
That's a great question. I seem to be considered by others as a deconstructivist, but I guess I don't know enough about what that means by the people who use the term, and I'm not sure that it's particularly relevant. I think anybody's work is an evolution. and is a very personal, specific thing, I think it's difficult to group people together under descriptive titles. I think that the whole notion of deconstructivism started out as an interesting idea, but it seems 12 months later to have ended up in a very problematic spot. We were in an article in the New York Times, which Joseph Giovannini wrote last winter, where we were labeled. I think that was one of the first times that term was used, and we were included in that article with the showroom you saw tonight. And at the time, I sort of had a problem with all of that, and it came as a big surprise that I was part of anybody's movement. So I don't know how else to answer that question.
So, in terms of design aesthetic, do you have something you're after?
I'd say so. I think I talked about it for about an hour and a half. I hope that it came through as kind of a personal approach, which is based in my own history and my own experience and my own kind of philosophical point of view. I guess I spend more time thinking about what things want to be than what it means in a larger context with what everybody else thinks about what they're trying to do. But I think there is a lot of there are common threads that are weaving a picture, and it has to do with examining the real nature of things and experimenting with materials and structure and freeing up of constraints that we saw 10 years ago being placed on people. I mean, it seems like every generation is very busy freeing themselves from their predecessors' constraints, and the postmodernists were freeing themselves from the modernists, and now people like us are trying to free ourselves from the postmodernists and the modernists, and go back and look at Tonga for inspiration.
What kind of constraints do you think might be on us recognize the next generation?
I think it's very easy to seek novelty in design work, and I think that's one of the big traps that is likely to face people working today. And I think it has to do with the rapid turnaround in the media. Within 12 months, as we have just seen, a whole movement, for whatever it's worth, rose and fell. So it's kind of scary. I think you have to just stick your head down on your drawing board and not worry about all of that and just do your work. And think about what you are doing as an individual and not what everybody else is doing. Boy, that sounds pretty didactic. I'm sorry about that. This is New York time. Any other questions? Thank you very much.